Hi everyone, my name's Alyssa Kane. I'm a senior with a concentration in editing, and I didn't know what to research for this project, so I just started looking at a bunch of articles to kind of get ideas, and I found one that talked about visual effects in film. Even though I'm not a visual effects artist, it's something I think is really cool and I would like to learn more about, so I dove a little deeper down there. It reminded me of something we actually discussed in one of my VFX classes last year, which is talking about CGI and the place it has in film. Um, so yeah, I looked at more articles on that, and it really made me start thinking about it. So I kind of want to talk about how CGI is used in film, but also like how it can be used too much or too excessively, and kind of talk about where its place is. So I'm sure we can all agree CGI is fantastic. It's a wonderful technology that we have to create anything. It's allowing us to create any creature, any setting, anything we can think of, something that doesn't exist in the real world, we can put our characters in that situation or in that planet. Which is something that was very difficult to do many, many years ago. They would have to cut scenes or find creative ways around it. And we're extremely lucky that we have this technology to create any story we can imagine. So I'm sure in that regard we can all agree it's fantastic in that way. Some really good examples of that off the bat is the character Gollum or Smeagol from Lord of the Rings. He is a fully CGI character, obviously using motion capture so that he looks a little bit more lively since it's a real actor playing him. But the way he interacts with the other actual live human characters on set, it's seamless and it's flawless, and it allows that story to be told and shown in such a visually stunning way. Another great example, Rise of the Planet of the Apes or Dawn of the Apes, that whole series that they just recently made with the monkeys. Caesar, also a motion capture character, but fully CGI, and it looks incredible, absolutely stunning. It really makes you feel like you're in that film, and you really feel involved, and it's a huge improvement from the very old Rise of the Planet of the Apes films using puppetry, which is a great example of how far we've come from that. Even more Jungle Book, using those same CGI animals and a lot more. It looks fantastic. Same with Avatar. That was a huge success when it first came out, just how stunning it looked, allowing the characters to be these Avatar creatures but also live in Pandora, I think it was the place that they were in. Just the stunning colors and the way the texture looked. It took them years to make, but it was fantastic. So those are all of many great films that use CGI very effectively and very strongly, where it has its place, it's done seamlessly, it's done well, and it integrates really well with the actual live reality part of filmmaking. So even though it is great, there are some films that I think overuse it or rely on it too heavily or don't use it correctly. Like they maybe they didn't have enough time and it just didn't turn out quite the way they wanted. So I think talking about CGI, there definitely needs to be a balance between what is real and what is not real. Since it is such an amazing technology, I feel like, or advancement, people often will rely on it too heavily for things that aren't necessarily needed, and I'm not sure what the story is. Maybe they didn't have money for said prop or character, or maybe they just wanted to cut a corner and they thought CGI would be easier, and it's not. So a great example of that, I think, just using CGI where it's very unnecessary. I think a really good and funny example is in Green Lantern. Ryan Reynolds' suit was fully CGI, and I think we can all agree it did not look good. I don't know why they decided to do that. They could have just made him a suit, and it would have been much easier. And there's so many jokes about it, especially in Deadpool. He mocks it all the time. So that's just one of the many examples of sometimes where it's just used for things that don't even need CGI. There are things that do exist in the real world that we could just use for that. Maybe the filmmakers decided to go through the CGI route just because they thought it would be a good idea. So going off of that, I found, looking into this research, I found an article called "Is CGI Going Too Far in Movies?" on the Odyssey, written by John Maffeo? I don't know if I said that right. But he talked a lot about how CGI has a purpose and needs to be used for the right reasons in the right way. So he talks a lot about, he gave a really good example about how in the Star Wars Force Awakens, Carrie Fisher just passed shortly after that film was made. And there was a lot of talk about how they were going to continue that, and how, because she was scheduled to be in the next couple films. And it is rumored that Disney discussed maybe making a CGI version of Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, or General Leia, or, yeah, as Leia, in order to, honor her and carry her on. I'm not sure if that's something they actually considered or if they were going to, and I don't know if they decided against it or just people had such strong backlash against that for many reasons. They decided it was best to honor her by just writing her out of the story, and that's the best way to let the character live on. They obviously made the right decision there, but I think that's something that a lot of films fall victim to, is they're like, we have the technology, why not use it? Which is a very valid point. It can be used and it can be done well, but a lot of times I think sometimes it's best just to not. Just to do the real thing, especially in that case. If an actor passed, it would be easy just to carry them on in CGI, but it wouldn't be the same. It would not look good. It would just kind of ruin that character's reputation. So I think in that regard, they made a good decision by just deciding to write her out and pay her respects and just let her. A lot of films also use CGI to make an actor look younger or older. I know that was used in the remake of Tron. I think I heard it was used in Star Wars as well. It was used in a bunch of films, and sometimes it looks good and sometimes it doesn't. So there's just ways of just knowing when it's good to use and when it's not good to use, and when you think it will work and when it won't. I guess it also depends on what kind of CGI talent creator, VFX artist you have, how much time or budget you have, I think can go a lot into that regard as well. So maybe it's not fully the filmmaker's fault. Maybe it's just they didn't have the budget or the time to properly do the CGI right. Another example I thought of that was really, really good, I'm sure you guys heard of the film. Another reason why I think CGI is so heavily overused is in a film called Valerian and the City of the Thousand Planets from 2017. It's a movie that got some press and people didn't really know much about it, and once it came out, it didn't do very well. There's a lot of theories of why it didn't do well. It just had a weird story, no one really heard of it. There was a lot of other things wrapped into it, but one of the factors of why it probably didn't do as well as they thought it would is because the film is like 98% CGI. Like the only thing real is like maybe the actors' faces, maybe. Like it was so heavily CGI used. Everything was created. And there are some scenes where it looks kind of cool, but I think it's just that fact of it just feels really fake and processed and unreal. And yes, it is unreal because they're in a fantasy world, but it's still the way that the audience takes it in is like, this doesn't feel right. So I think there's a lot of balance between using CGI where you feel like it's needed and where it's welcomed, and when you need it to get this idea across, but you also have to know it's best to keep as much reality as you can in filmmaking. At least that's how I see it. Even in fantasy worlds, like obviously, yes, create whatever awesome world you want to create, whatever creatures, but just know where the balance is and know to keep it as real as you can. Especially in a lot of filmmaking, when they do green screen or visual effects with actors, the good filmmakers will try and at least make real props or things for the actors to interact with to help them portray the character better. And that goes into a lot about actors talking about how CGI is great, but sometimes it can overpower the actor's performance. And that goes into a lot about that. I mean, just sometimes an actor can deliver a phenomenal performance, but there's some alien character in the CGI on them just looks terrible, and it'll completely take away from whatever phenomenal performance they gave. And so that's another problem with that too, is kind of knowing where that boundary is on making sure it doesn't take over the actor's ability and it doesn't ruin their character, it doesn't ruin whatever performance they gave. Going off of that, I found another article called Practical Effects versus CGI on the Los Angeles Film School news page. The article talks a lot about various cases when CGI is used with actors on and offset. And there's a quote from it that says, "Overall, it seems like special effects artists, directors, producers, and actors alike find that realistic practical effects can make acting in a film more realistic for the cast and for the audience." I haven't acted, so I can't vouch for actors, but I'm sure from interviews I've heard they talk about that. But also just as an audience point of view, it feels a lot more real if you just feel the actors acting, you feel that reality of the set, of the characters, of the costume, of the creatures. Yes, CGI has its place, and it's fun, and it can add that realism, but just knowing where that balance is. So in conclusion, I think CGI is an amazing technological advancement. I'm glad we have it. It allows us to tell these amazing stories, but I think a lot of filmmakers, especially nowadays, fall victim of like, oh, we have to have CGI, and we have to do all these things, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's best to keep it as real as possible, only using it when you need to, for special cases, or just trying to keep it minimum. That's up to the filmmaker, that's up to them, and sometimes they can do it and it'll turn out great, and sometimes it won't. So I think just kind of knowing that balance, and a lot of just because we have the technology doesn't mean we should always use it. You know, just because we have it doesn't mean that everything needs to be CGI. Just knowing where the place is and where that boundary is. So I think that's a really interesting topic we've talked about in classes before, and I'm sure you guys probably have opinions on it too, on when you think it's too much or too little or where its place is. So yeah, I love visual effects. I think it's cool, and I'm excited to see where movies go from there and how they look in the future. So that is it. Thanks.